there's the Alexander Mexi clap.
It is. There it is. There it is. Slightly later, actually, in the month. We are a bit naughty on this one, but yeah.
Well, that's because we had that great episode with Robin Henry.
That's very true. That's very
Damian.
true. Which actually has been pushed around by Corry themselves, and I think has got quite good traction from what we can see.
Yes, and also it has been London International Disputes Week, and we've been kind of busy, haven't we?
We have, yeah.
And some really good events.
Very good, yeah. It's been great to get out and meet lots of people, actually, as these events are very good at doing, getting people together rather than it being a Zoom or equivalent, actually to get out and hear people talk and mix and mingle afterwards.
Yeah, so I think it's been really good, and we've still got a little bit more of that to come.
Mm-hmm.
So looking forward to more of that. Everyone's looking quite summery. It is a Friday, so it's sort of we're quasi-dressed down. Alexandra, you're looking very summery. Where have you just come back from your holiday? Where was that?
I went to Crete for 10 days. It was lovely. It was quiet. The weather was amazing. It wasn't too hot, which I can't, because I can't stand too hot, especially when you're sunbathing. So yeah, we would like to go again, definitely.
I'd like you to stay a bit longer and do a bit more work, but anyway. Yeah, indeed. Yeah. And DT, you're looking very, very casual, very, very dressed down today.
Well, it is Friday, so I thought I'd not make the effort, as it were.
Yeah, I'm in the summer suit.
You are.
Which is this is a suit I had made in Hong Kong. Jim's Tailor Workshop of Admiralty. I hope Jim's still there, banging them out. But it's also shocking for me to realise that it must be 20 years ago to the day that I arrived in Hong Kong.
Wow.
20 years.
Sort of feels like yesterday, I'm sure, and sort of doesn't.
I know.
In that weird way.
I know. It is quite shocking. It is quite shocking. Anyway, we digress, but let's have a little quick look, DT, what's happening out there, what's going on.
Yeah, so I think the big call, I suppose, really, the year as a whole, but we've seen recently is the elections, and I suppose we did write about geopolitical risks, etc., in our sort of piece at the end of last year.
So you're going back to the strategy piece that we put out at the end of last year, the kind of this what Skadi's kind of what to look out for in the year ahead, and elections was something that we did flag, didn't we?
Yes, absolutely, and we've just in the last week or two seen two very large populaces vote in both India and in Mexico, and on the back of that, we've seen quite a lot of volatility in these markets. Certainly in Mexico, in the FX market, I think the peso fell quite, was down about 4 or 5%, I think, Monday, Tuesday of this week. And India, Modi, I think, who was expected to sort of romp home, has won, but will have to form a coalition. And that market sold off quite aggressively as well. And that the Indian stock market has been a sort of, you think the S&P's gone up a lot. The Indian has been on an absolute tear. So it's interesting to see, the fact that you are starting to see volatility in these markets that have sort of felt like one-way bets, then, nothing could ever go wrong. It just goes to show that not all elections are a slam dunk. I mean, we've had the starting gun fired over here in the UK, and it hasn't, it's felt relatively low-key, but I think that's probably because it's slightly like a Labour shoo-in. So the Tories are sort of throwing any idea at the wall to see if anything sticks. It doesn't really seem to be.
Well, I think the kind of the interesting aspect, because I think this is one of the things that we kind of really picked out in our call at the beginning, looking back, 6 months ago when we were looking at this stuff, and particularly the choice in the US as well. You have got this quite a kind of stark, definitely a right versus probably more centre, to be fair, across places. But I think what's interesting in the UK is obviously the Farage move. And I think with that comes the potential for quite a lot of wind back on the moves in climate and the climate skepticism. And we've kind of seen that, right? And we've done a few episodes about climate because obviously it's becoming so embedded into the financial system and particularly from the, control side of stuff. But I do think that this is going to be the kind of, I don't know about to say pivotal point, but I do think it's a kind of pivotal point in just about the pace at which, we move as the world from here.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. And bizarrely, we're sort of starting to see more regulatory pushes to get sort of stuff a bit more codified. It was all quite loose, and so people could, well, I suppose we saw a lot of kind of greenwashing type cases where people have sort of said something but not really got up to it or whatever it was. But I think it comes back to a theme you did talk about, and we have talked about, which a lot of this policy was, or these ideas were struck in a low interest rate environment, pre sort of cost of living crisis, and actually, I think most people are in agreement that there are issues that need to be dealt with. But there's a cost to these, and actually, when rates are low and you can sort of project forward spending, and it kind of, there's a lot of big numbers coming, being thrown around, but you could sort of justify them. If you were saying to people, well, you need to convert your house and you need to put in, loft insulation, et cetera, whatever it may be, that's very different in a cost of living crisis when people are looking at, the interest rates, et cetera, that are pushing up their mortgages, a lot of their borrowing type activity. People don't just have a sort of infinite pool of money to go, well, I could just dip into that and do this and that. So it'll be interesting to see. You're definitely seeing a big pushback in the States on it. And yeah, it feels, I think there's some European parliamentary elections, I think, or some such going on at the moment. There's, you're seeing a pushback from youth there, and a sort of, unfortunate rise of the sort of, not the far right in some places, or just a sort of more of a right-leaning move by people, partly pushing back against some of this green type agenda. Excuse me.
Yeah, so I think that's still probably to come in the UK. I don't think we've had much debate on that, but I think it could come in the next few weeks. Obviously, election here, 4th of July.
Yep.
So kind of that's a relatively easy date to remember. What else is happening out there, DC? I mean, a couple of, given that we've mentioned the kind of the report we did 6 months ago, it might be timely to kind of go through that and just have a look at some of the things we were talking about. What else were we talking about in that report?
Well, we certainly talked about T+1, which has now been and gone, and from what I have read, been a success, as in there hasn't been some sort of major crisis that's come off the back of it, where there's been, gazillions of failed trades and massive knock-on issues. So that seems to have pushed through okay, and that which will, I suppose, bring to the fore the fact that, we saw T+1 has now happened in US, Canada, and Mexico. There's been a lot of working parties formed over here in the UK and EU to look at it. So there's been a bit of a pushback on it, but maybe the fact that that's now over the line and seems to have gone relatively smoothly, that will sort of push this forward at the agenda over here. Yeah. And I think that a lot of the worries at the time were that you've got a lot of ETFs, for instance, that invest in US stocks and European stocks, and that day one, that 1 versus 2 mismatch could sort of trip things up. It seems so far that that's been okay. So maybe we'll end up harmonising in the next year or two. But, that's a watch this space, I suppose. Other stuff, like the other stuff we talked about insolvencies, the sort of the rise of insolvencies.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm feeling calmer about that myself now, into this year. I think things have obviously, there've been insolvencies. I don't think it's been great, but I think the kind of the fear of the massive wave has calmed down. I think, economies are looking a little bit better. Mm-hmm. So that's good. I think it's all a bit of a race against time in some of the private stuff, because it's kind of, how transparent is some of that stuff, and is it well marked? Are people, holding stuff at valuations? Will they get found out? Is that going to be the shoe that drops? But I think things are okay out there on that one.
I think that, yes, much to my surprise, really, if I'm honest. But we'll as I said, we'll watch this space. But I would agree with you. Not that it ever felt bleak, but it definitely felt that there was a sort of cloud on the horizon, and not that that's necessarily cleared completely, but things feel a bit more.
We've still got 6 months.
Exactly.
just, I think we'll hold on to that one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What else we spoke about? We wrote a bit about cyber. And that has been ongoing and ramping up more and more.
I think our call was very much more specific to the financial industry, and we were making a very specific call around, activity by Russia particularly, but also, possibly China. And I guess, now you definitely think Iran. I think there is activity out there. Looking again at, healthcare has been a place that people have, hackers have gone for. And we had another incident, recently in the last 2 weeks in healthcare, which has had, big consequences. There's been, an episode with Santander, hasn't there? And there was obviously quite a high-profile one for Ticketmaster. But what we were calling or highlighting to people is just the prevalence of programmers from, particularly Russia, Moscow programmers 20 years ago, 15 years ago, that have intimate knowledge of our financial system and, how much of a threat that could be. I'm relieved, to be fair, to that nothing has happened that we're aware of. That's the other thing too.
Yes.
Things may well have happened, but we're not necessarily aware of that. But I do think that is something that just continues as a threat. With Putin, you can see the rhetoric is building up. He doesn't obviously wants to deter, increased use of weapons in Ukraine and, the source of those weapons. And, as we pointed out, finance is so crucial to the functioning of the West. And of course, he feels very shut out from the financial system with all the sanctions. So I think that one absolutely remains a threat, and that's not one I'm going to give up. With 6 months to go, definitely not going to give that one up.
Plus, with the US election, obviously the granddaddy of them all coming up towards the end of the year, not that there necessarily will be cyber incidents related to that, I'm sure there will, but more to do with misinformation, all that sort of stuff. This is a real, well, not quite the first, but social media and everything will play such an important role in that forthcoming election. So.
There's another event that's going to be really reliant on technology, worldwide, high profile, the Olympics.
Yes, yeah.
That's one to watch, because that is certainly one that people could have a go at, and certainly, I think it was the Winter Olympics where held in Korea. I think the Koreans had the North Koreans had a go at that one. I think as well. So much the embarrassment there. So I think there is that embarrassment factor too. Anything else, DT, or we kind of
something slightly not from that piece of research. So I think that's covered the main topics that we had. Just sort of coming back to what we've seen in markets and slightly in your wheelhouse, there's been a lot of issuance of convertible bonds. We've seen, which not that we were calling for necessarily, but certainly you've always said, look, as rates have gone up, these things suddenly become a lot more attractive. And we've seen it, especially on these big sort of Chinese tech names. I think they've all but done sort of multi-billion-dollar issuance. So
I think that's right. And for that kind of vanilla issuance, the circumstances are perfect. And as you've pointed out, volatility is maintaining a base rising, and that volatility helps to bring down the cost of funding for convert issuers, which is great. The interest rate environment remains high, so there is a benefit to people looking at other ways to explore cheaper financing. We wrote a few issues ago about structures that we were concerned about.
Yep.
And I was surprised to learn that there are things like moving structures out there in the private space. I am aware of those. So people should, I think, be very mindful. We may not see those through to fruition, but they're certainly being offered to people.
Right.
And again, that sort of plays into the kind of, the insolvency stuff that we were talking about. When issuers are under real pressure, and, lenders are very, concerned about the security of what they're, who they're lending to, then they're going to look for structures that really guarantee, security and a return for them. But, these are not good structures, particularly for, the smaller shareholders that could be impacted, from a sale in the share price and so on. So I think that's something that the control function should be alive to, should be alert to. that you may see, and particularly as we move into the second half of the year, and we start focusing on, people looking at budgets and going, right, how can I get our numbers, I'm talking about in the banks now. Yes, yeah. How can we really get the numbers, to achieve the budget towards the end of the year? And they might start looking at some of the, more racy kind of products. So I think that's something to really, keep an eye on out there. So, and the side of CBs, anything else? We've had a bit of meme too, haven't we? What's been going on in the...
Well, I think there's something... We're recording this on, what are we, Friday the 7th. There's GameStop Part 2 has sort of hit the headlines, all triggered by a sort of vaguely dormant account. I'm going to get all the names of these actors wrong, but anyway, posting a picture of someone sitting forward in a chair, which put sort of 70% on GameStop price. There is, I think...
Well, there's a kitty as well, isn't there?
Yes, hello. Well, it's not Hello Kitty, I don't know. But anyway, yes, there's another announcement today along the lines of, I think they're now, funnily enough, as if your equity goes up that hard, they start to place shares into it. So, it's, I don't know. We'll see how this one pans out. But there's been a knock-on effect to crypto actually. So that bizarrely has sort of caught a bid again. So I don't know. We're seeing speculative assets bid up.
Well, I think 2024 could be the year of rehabilitation for crypto, couldn't it?
Yeah.
There's all the ETFs that's gone relatively successfully. People are feeling a bit calmer about it. I think there's been more success on the anti-financial crime side in terms of working out how to trace assets now. I think that's getting a lot better. I myself on the sextortion side am seeing that my value is going up. I've had 4 sextortion attempts, and each time I think they just feel with me that they're not offering enough. So I'm up at around $2,000 of Bitcoin at this point.
Okay.
So I'm interested as to where that can go to. If we get any higher, I might consider alternative careers. But we joke about that, but I do think that is sort of an area that we're seeing more noise about, and hopefully, again, that's going to wake up some political will. I feel there is a bit of a political will and movement, and also will within some of these companies, on the social media side, to really start to tackle this stuff under immense pressure, as well, from people too. So that's good. What else is happening, DT? Anything else out there?
I've scribbled one more thing on our board based off an interesting article I read. A lot of short sellers had just thrown in the towel, which is possibly the call of a market top, but we'll see. I'm not putting my neck on the line and calling that.
This is due to M&A, is it?
And M&A, so the UK market has allegedly been, disowned by the global investing community. So, and has not really moved as the US has gone off to the races. I think there's a fair few short positions within the UK market, and there's been quite a lot of M&A activity that suddenly sort of popped up that is squeezing these names, obviously quite hard. And I was just reading, someone, I think it was on a Bloomberg article, saying a lot of short sellers, that coupled with a GameStop, which is obviously a much hairier short to be holding, has just, people I think have gone, it's just not worth the trade.
Well, it's an interesting one because you and I were arbitrage traders in equities. Yeah. And we had risk arb books. We did pairs trading, and those strategies require pretty stable environments. To be fair, and we often think about what happened when people started launching kind of internet strategies and online trading strategies when we were trading the financials, and banks would go up 10% and then someone else would announce and they would go up, and it became very, very painful. And I think it's a repetition of that kind of market activity, isn't it?
Yes, I think you're right.
So I think for the control functions, it's pretty straightforward, really. You just need to have a conversation with the guys that are running, arbitrage books, and ask them, understand the strategy, totally get it. You're selling stuff that's expensive, you're buying stuff that's cheap, but if it doesn't work, how are you protecting the bank?
Yes.
What are the stops? the stops basically, or the how are you conditioning the strategy?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Like, is vol a massive input? So therefore, with vol, overall market vol, maybe not the equity individual equity vol being low. Maybe you're going, well, we can really ramp this strategy up into year end because there's the vol allows us to do that. So yeah, no, I think there's stuff in there.
Yeah, good stuff. Cool. Well, that's a great recap, DC, for the middle of the year. Actually, everyone's selling May, but actually, why would you? There's too much going on.
Yeah.
Although I'm off to Le Mans next week, so just throw that in there. Any listeners going out to Le Mans? I hope you have a great time. The weather's actually not that good at the moment, the forecast, but that should make for a good race, as long as we don't have the safety car out all the time.
Yes.
But anyway, there we go.
Hours,
so, DT, where are you taking us this month? Over the horizon, where are we going?
So we're looking at green mortgages this month.
Ooh, I like it.
And there have been a number of articles over the past month looking at sort of the risks embedded in sort of property portfolios at the banks. But all sort of driven by the fact that there's been big push, obviously, as we were alluding to earlier, in this sort of green space, by various actors to try to improve the green sustainability of the housing stock, which is, incredibly uncarbon friendly. A lot of energy bills are much higher than they could be if work was done on these properties. So,
I mean, you're talking mainly about the UK there, really, aren't you? I mean, if you think about our housing stock, it's quite a lot. It's quite, Victorian and older.
Yes.
And it's got all this wonderful character, but actually, it's all pretty terrible.
Yes.
In terms of insulation and all that, kind of stuff.
Yeah. So there's been a big push to encourage green sort of type mortgages, where maybe you can get a slightly cheaper rate, but as part of the deal, you're either buying a new build, which hopefully has a decent energy rating, or that you might look to do the work on your property that you've either bought or you're remortgaging to do work to improve your energy efficiency. But the take up of these mortgages hasn't been particularly high. But there were the sort of the trigger for this announcement was the Deutsche Bank did a deal. Raised money with the EIB, the European Investment Bank, underwriting part of it, which would therefore allow them to offer this slightly cheaper rate for the mortgage. And then looking at how that gets securitized further down the track. So that was the sort of angle we were looking at.
So it's good for the customers because they get a cheaper rate. But what's in it for the banks, the lenders? What do they get out of this?
Well, theoretically, they can get cheaper. They don't have to offset as much against the borrowing that they would put in for.
So it's also it's cost of capital effect.
Exactly.
Yeah. So they're getting better, more favourable capital treatment on effectively green portfolios, or making those portfolios greener.
Yes.
And obviously we looked at in the previous month, the emissions risk transfer business. So this is all part of that kind of larger space, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think what intrigues me in here is that you've got some pretty interesting tailwinds in terms of incentivization for people.
Yeah.
Because if you're obviously the banks, you love a bit of lower capital relief. So you're definitely interested in getting more green mortgages onto your books. And of course, with that could come the temptation to maybe be a little bit more fast and loose over what is a green mortgage to get them on the books, to make your overall numbers look good. And then from the consumer's point of view, if you're going to get access to cheaper funding because you're doing something, you're getting you'll be able to be classified as a green mortgage, but also maybe you can take some steps to get to be, eligible for a green mortgage, then that's a good tailwind too. And of course, what you've talked about, I think, here is classifying. So explain to everyone how is everyone rating, working out?
So there's these things called energy performance certificates, EPCs, and the general feeling is that if you can get your EPC rating, I think it goes from A through to F or G.
Yeah, I mean, if people haven't seen one, you can see one immediately. Go on to Rightmove or one of the property sites, Zoopla. pull up any property and it'll show you. It's that thing with the coloured bar chart.
So as
isn't
a landlord, you have to have it now.
Yeah,
I think
in the UK, definitely.
So.
And what you can also see, because my oldest son is now looking at properties. He's getting all excited about getting the property ladder. So you've got where it currently is, and then also the potential of where the property could go to if you did some things to it, which all sounds well and good, right?
Yes, it does, but obviously it does bring in there could be massive issues about fraud around these sort of things. How is that benchmark actually set, and who helps you? Who issues that certificate, for example? How is all that?
Well, we looked at that because obviously we love pulling on a thread at Skadi. That's the investigators in us, and we started having a bit of fun with this. So we found the link to have a look for someone who could provide you with an EPC, an energy performance certificate. And I had great fun looking at my postcode and just seeing, who was available. And it is intriguing. I would encourage people to have a look. Go on to gov.uk, find the section. Maybe we can give a link in the comments on LinkedIn when we post this. So you can go and have a look and have a play yourself, because it's actually quite fun seeing who you can approach to get an EPC. There are clearly, surveyors, and that I feel good with that. But what I found intriguing was the amount of kind of Hotmail and Gmail email addresses of people that I just feel pretty sure are running some kind of side hustle. And this is just one of their side hustles. And maybe, they're doing this by day. Then, around about 6 o'clock, they jump into an Uber, and maybe they do a bit of Deliveroo, and then they're maybe on, this. And that's nothing wrong with that in terms of people working hard. But I also, just wonder about the rigor around some of this stuff. Plus also, if you do have a swathe of people that are offering these services that are doing this because they are motivated to earn, then, and where you have banks on one side, the stakes are massive, lower capital treatment, that's a big cost saving. And for, the people getting mortgages, that's saving money.
Yeah,
so to throw a few quid to
or get 3 or 4 done and pick the best one, whatever it may be.
All sorts of way that you can do that.
And I think, interesting, in the UK, the green mortgage market hasn't really taken off so far, from what I've read. As in, I think only 0.4% of mortgages are. And I think partly that is because the mortgage market here is such a competitive market that even with a green tag, it's very hard to undercut, because at the end of the day, most people, they just look at their monthly payment, they definitely don't want to pay more. If there was a noticeable drop off, then I think there would be possibly big issues around fraud, because there would be a big incentive to try and get that, either your current number down, or your as you were alluding to, your sort of forward letter down, if you did the work, sort of thing.
Well, there's so many things in here, aren't there? I mean, it's that they're not normally the cheapest deal around. Actually, they might be up there. What they do give you is a bit of a holiday for a couple of years before you go on to revert to a normal rate. But I think, just what we were talking about, not 10 minutes ago, the housing stock in the UK is pretty old. So, maybe there's not been much uptake, but actually, maybe it's pretty hard to get a mortgage on the kind of housing stock that's out there. Yeah. And this kind of comes on to another issue with this this mortgage product, or this area, which I think is an area of risk that I do think the control function should be thinking about and looking at, is, of course, if you're going to get the housing stock up to the required level, people want some kind of cash advance. They want some kind of, incentive to go and do the work. And again, how are you verifying and assessing that the work has been done? And, is this just cash in the person's bank account? Here you go. There's 10 grand. Go and do your upgrades. Yeah. Or is it, what are the milestones? You're going to put in solar panels. Okay, send us the invoice. Yeah. And I think there's lots of different ways that this can happen. And I think the potential for fraud. I think also the potential for, we had this certificate done, and it was on the basis that we were going to do this. Now honest, we've done the work. All right, okay, then the certificate says this. All that kind of stuff.
Yeah, or circumstances change, and suddenly you both be laid off or whatever, but you have actually got the extra, $100,000 for to do your, all this work, and then you just physically can't do it because it's sort of paying for other things. Anyway, I mean, it could be, yeah. And on the fraud stuff, I mean, there's been a big issue in Italy where they had a big incentive plan to try and do this, and I think they reckon it's cost them $5 billion because you could apply for I think 110% relief and then cash that in immediately. So I think there was, as you say, there was no checking going on. Once you'd sort of got the credit, then people went into you ended up in crypto, a lot of it, whatever it may be.
And that's really so surprising for the Italian market, being a place where there aren't organisations that might seek on a massive scale to take advantage of such things.
Yes.
Indeed. But that's really interesting, Damian, from that point of view. So, well, I think it is one to watch. I think hopefully, as we've pointed out, there hasn't been necessarily the uptake yet in the UK, and so maybe that means that people have got a chance to kind of look at this and really think about this carefully.
Yeah.
And shepherd this through and make sure these things are working. It's certainly something that the regulators are interested in, and I do think it flows, very well from, the topics that we've covered recently. The emission risk transfer. There's going to be some very, very interesting pulls within the bank because you're going to want to retain a lot of this stuff on your balance sheet to get the lower capital treatment, but then again, you might want to lay it off, etc., to someone else who can take advantage of that, and it's how you reload.
Yeah.
In all this stuff, is it going to encourage more lending, or is it going to encourage a little bit of fast and loose practice to kind of classify things in a loose way? And I think it is also interesting in just in terms of with climate and with the risks that the financial industry faces, you've got very different currents. What I mean is you've got this kind of overall massive macro global picture where you're getting concerned about the impact on countries and so on, and then you've got these kind of much more local level micro things happening where thinking about where are the properties that are vulnerable to flooding in the UK, or that kind of stuff too. So I can see a lot of scope, let's say, for people who are on the business end, taking advantage of all these different things to kind of engineer things to have the best outcome for them. And we see that time and time again, not just in this stuff, but just generally within finance, because the incentivizations are on profit, people follow the path of least resistance. Yep. Yeah. And that's where I think, we need a little bit of a rethink around some of this stuff to try and, drive things in the correct way, or, to what we're trying to do. But obviously difficult when you've got toing and froing in terms of, the political will, as you've pointed out, cost of living and people reassessing what people can really do and how fast things have to happen. And also there's a security issue too, not around, the building stock, let's say, but certainly around, some of the energy stuff as well, right? Yeah. And reliance and trying to build a portfolio that's more diverse now than maybe you were thinking about, 4 or 5 years ago, where there was just a drive to drop fossil fuels. It was an interesting kind of comment out of the UN this week. Did you see that with the kind of, calling for an end to advertising from oil companies? Right. I can't think of the last time I saw an advert by an oil company in the UK.
No, it's few and far between.
I mean, they don't need to, right? Because it's you drive a car or whatever, you need the fuel.
Yeah.
So it's kind of it. But I do remember from a childhood, I can sing the "You Can Be Sure a Shell" song. But what I was listening to a program, after that, and there was a kind of an observation from one of the pundits on there about the fact that there's such a government ownership in those assets that really that people are going after the wrong levers if they're going after the companies. You need to really be looking at the countries and trying to encourage, on a country level. So anyway, just interesting stuff. Well, I think it's a great topic, DT, for this month. We are getting through to kind of halfway through the year. Hopefully we'll get another couple of episodes out before Alexandra gets to go on holiday again.
It's not confirmed yet.
It's not confirmed yet.
It's just an idea.
But also, you've done very, very well in picking up some future guests, and we're very excited about that, aren't we?
Yes.
We've got some really interesting topics coming up in the next few months, I would say. Some very interesting people. I think London International Disputes Week has helped that because we've met some pretty interesting people as well. True, so really looking forward to that. If you're enjoying the Skadi podcast, don't forget to have a look for the Skadi Discord, where you can join the conversation and see all of the podcast materials and a treasure trove of other stuff too. And we look forward to catching up with you in the next few weeks.
Brilliant.
Have a great time.
Absolutely. Thank you.